Alright guys, to the left we have the Samsung Q8FN, to the right we have the Samsung Q90T, and we're kind of just going to look into HGIG. I know a lot of people wanted to know if the Samsung Q8FN can keep up, so I'm going to show you that HGIG is enabled here. We are in HDR for anybody wondering. It's the only way you can get to HGIG. We're going to go to External Device Manager here. We're going to go all the way down at the bottom. We're going to see HGIG, and that is selected right there. So that final thing is ticked blue, and that kind of lets you know that we're in HGIG mode. So what I found while in HGIG mode is that it does a little bit of good and bad for the TV. So colors are nice in game mode when using HGIG and, not being afraid to crank them a little bit. But I've notice that contrast is one of the things that kind of goes to the wayside a little bit, and it doesn't really tone map the way that it sounds like it should for a dynamic tone mapping feature. To the left, the Q8FN is showing deeper black levels. It's showing a significant day and night experience as far as depth and realism, and this is kind of what you're going to appreciate. Now, ironically enough, as you start to see more of the image, the Q90T is a very saturated picture, I found, but it's not an accurate one. So what I mean by that is you have very vivid shades of green and primary colors in general, but it doesn't have any variation to it that's like real. Like the lightsaber that Yoda's holding is supposed to be like almost like a fluorescent, like lime greenish kind of color, and it's not. It's more of this like just neon green kind of look to it. And the same can be said about his face. As we try to discern a bunch of varying colors in his face, it becomes extraordinarily difficult, as it's just kind of like one flat paletry here. Now, sorry that the camera was a little tilted there. I'm not really paying attention like I should. I'm just looking at the televisions here, trying to explain what I'm seeing on my end. And honestly speaking, as I look at it with my own eyes, the Q8FN is dominating for detail in a way that's just really impressive. Now, as we turn to the side here, we can kind of see more of the same here. What I will say is the Q90T is brighter in game mode than the Q8FN, so you can notice some highlights definitely popping off a lot better, because for whatever reason in game mode, it just, if you want it to be bright, it's just going to ruin the picture. It's not that it can't get bright, it just ruins the picture. So we're going to take a look at another character model here, and we're going to look at somebody like, I don't know, let's look at John Boyega, right? And we're just going to click in, and we're just going to zoom in so we can look at the facial details. Okay, so one of the things that becomes extremely apparent by looking at the Q8FN is that it's actually getting the skin tonality correct. Now, I'm going to have to open up my ISO so you can kind of see what's going on here. But essentially, the Q90T is just making it overly bright, and brighter than it ever would have been. And I'm telling you right now, that is not what it actually looks like. I don't know if you can see the rich darkness to the skin tonality on the Q8FN versus the Q90T. But that level of clarity is undeniable. Now keep in mind, HGIG is supposed to be the best practices for HDR content, but it's struggling to hold its own against just an average everyday game mode. I'm being very generous by saying that about the Q8FN, because it does a good job of keeping up. But I mean, looking at the detail from the side here, it becomes clear that the black levels of the Q90T are a problem. Because as we look at the Q8FN, it almost looks like an OLED of some sort with the way it just turns deep black, where the Q90T is just gray. And this is one of the defining characteristics of the game mode. Now, unfortunately, Samsung advertises that they have 120 zones of local dimming with their direct full array x16, but the 120 zones are way less than the 480 we had last year. So when you look at characters like this, and you look at things that are supposed to have serious dynamic range and really inky deep black levels, you start getting a lot of bright spotting that, again, the Q8FN, no saint, it definitely isn't the most uniform TV out there, but compared to the Q90T, it starts to look very saintly. Now, as we zoom out, You can notice that a lot of this is fog, as you see here on the back end, but when we start to get to this side profile, that is not fog. That is actually where the Q90T starts to get to be gray-black. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. And again, you can kind of see with the brown skin tone, it's just more natural on the Q8FN. And again, this isn't like a hype-up video for the Q8FN. This is to show you how Samsung is comparing to prior efforts. Now, another thing that I found that was really interesting is when you look at like really tight light sources like lightsabers, the Q90T does it really brilliantly, actually. It's very good at what it does. I'm going to have to lower down the ISO so that we can really kind of hone in on it. I'll take it almost as low as it can go. And we're going to just try to zoom in here on the lightsaber. So what you'll notice when you start looking at little details like this in HGIG mode is that it really, it's hard because the contrast isn't as tight as it should be compared to something like the Q8FN, where it's just getting a lot tighter to the subject. What I will say though is that the luminosity starts to work a little differently in HGIG. So shadows start to cast around the character a lot darker and a lot richer than what we would have on the Q8FN. So I don't know if you can see that, but just look at the shadow. It's way darker on the left side of both screens. Towards his shoulder here, it's darker than what we have on the Q8FN. That's extremely cool, very impressive, and these kinds of little differences start making a big difference as we get into actual gameplay. However, it's kind of going to be like one of those things where unless you see the full picture, you're not actually going to know what's going on. So it's hard because, you know, you've got to listen to this commentary to get an idea of exactly what's going on, and I'll try to walk you through it the best I can. But as I look at it again, now on the camera, it's looking just completely oversaturated. The Q90T is looking like it has just like crazy explosive color, especially the blue, like way better blue than the Q8FN. And that's just it's picking up of a hue that it just doesn't have. So it's gonna, again, final product look very, very different from what I'm trying to portray here. And that's, again, that's just one of these things that we just face as we do these comparisons. So again, please try to bear with the commentary and listen through until the end. So now what I'm going to do, well, before I do that, I want to get into like the classic, like Darth Vader here. So we're going to zoom in. And again, in a similar fashion, we're just going to scroll up and we're going to look at the character model. I'm going to get actually down low to the ground here. And then we're just going to look up. Now, you're not able to see too much just yet, but I'm painting a little picture here, if we will. And I'm going to open up the ISO here pretty high so you can kind of see what's going on as we start to spin things around. Actually, I'll lower it down just a hair. Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at the differences in, you know, the way that the light works when you're looking from like a backlit kind of subject, you know. And you can see that the Q90T, it does a good job of overall exposure, but it just falls a little bit flat where it needs to deliver that extra contrast. And this is a theme that I've noticed with the Q90T time after time again. Now again, if we take a look at those black levels, I don't know if you can see this, but there is bright spotting towards the top of this screen here. It gets a little bright and it turns into blooming. So when you have really challenging scenes like this where you have a bright object filling up like a big portion of the screen with a bunch of different elements going on, and then it goes black, it gets a little bloomy on the Q90T, where on the Q8FN, again, it's just really, really dark. And I'll open up my ISO further so you can see what I'm talking about. Hopefully that shows something off a little better. I don't want to make the Q90T look too bad. I'll put it back down to where I see it with my own eyes. But again, it's just kind of like one of those things that I've noticed as I'm looking around. HGIG is supposed to be like this monster tone mapping thing in a lot of people's minds, but in reality, HGIG, all it really does is try to find a way to tighten up your contrast, and it does so decently. Now, the trick is, though, it trips up, though. It's like an algorithm of sorts, I suppose, at this point in time, that is like messing up on Samsung, where it doesn't always work the way you need it to, but I think it does offer something for gamers that is pretty useful. So instead of just showing you character models, now we're actually going to dive into actual gameplay, and I'll show you HGIG and what it actually looks like when we get to main story content in games and just looking at what we see. Now I'm going to pick the observatory because there's a lot of colors and a nice skyline that you can look at here. It'll take a while for the game to load up, but then you'll see what it actually looks like. Now, as I look at the camera, the Q90T looks like it is just so much more saturated and vivid for color, and it does not look like that on my end. It is darker, the blue is darker, but it's definitely not as vibrant with all those different nuanced shades of cyan that are extraordinarily rich on the camera. So this is one of those examples where the camera, again, is seeing way more than what is actually there. And again, you have to be very careful with these kinds of comparisons sometimes if people don't vocalize what they're seeing. But essentially, guys, like as I've been using HGIG, I've been really noticing like clouds look really, really good. I feel like it helps clouds and like kind of like fine detail, like rock textures and things like that. But when you really start to investigate it towards like bright light sources, or like thinking like everything will be amazing, everything's going to be transformative, that's not what HGIG does. HGIG is just trying to tighten up the contrast a little bit more than what it would have been on its own. And I can say it definitely does do that, and it is a nice addition to HDR. Is it perfect? No, but I think that maybe with time and with better implementation on games that actually support it, it'd be good to go. Something I think is weird, I don't know if you can see it, but there was a bit of a purple tint back there on the Q90T. So I don't really know why it was there, but that's just, I guess, one of those little quirks that I figure out as I'm doing these kinds of comparisons. Now, as we're looking at this image quality of this hologram here, we notice that it's not actually isolating as tightly as it should. And I don't know if you can see that, but the Q8FN is way, way tighter. Now, this is awesome to show off as well for people who think that you have to have HGIG, and that's absolutely a necessity. I'm sure you guys saw how gray the black levels on the Q90T got to the right, and it's just one of those things that just happen. Though as the clouds come in, notice how gorgeous the clouds look. They're very rich, very deep, and they are absolutely beautiful. That's one of the things that like I really appreciate about HGIG, and as I was mentioning earlier, cloud detail is really immaculate with HGIG, and it really does kind of create this dreamy, picturesque feel that's, I don't know, it's not something that we've had with HDR. And I hope like more, I guess, companies come out and try to support it. Oh my God, what is that glitch? That's so crazy that you guys are actually seeing a weird glitch like that. I mean, check that out. That's gnarly. He's just falling through the world. This is crazy. But at least we get a look at the sky. Now, as we look at the sky here, as we fall a million light years, I'm going to lower down the ISO here. Okay? And notice how the Q8FN is actually tighter and more uniform than the Q90T. The Q90T with that HGIG, you would think the sun in the sky would be a really tight outline, but that doesn't actually happen. So that's something I've also noticed. I mean, the clouds look incredible, but the sun doesn't look incredible. So I don't know the thinking on that. I don't know if it's because it's not a native HGIG game. Right now, I think there's only No Man's Sky and like maybe two others, but honestly, it's just like, I don't know, that's definitely not it, man, because you go to HGIG to see that extra punch. So I'm going to try to get this mission. No, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to restart it because that'll mess things up here. But what I'll do is I'll go and I'll gather something else, and I'll just kind of try to put something else on the screen here, because that was just a disaster. As you guys saw, I fell through the entire map. Fun. But, I mean, I know a lot of people have been asking about HGIG and what it offers. Is it worth the upgrade? I would say if you have a Samsung Q8FN or something of a comparable nature, I wouldn't exactly sell my Q8FN or anything that's like comparable to it just for the sole purpose of getting HGIG or other modern features like that. I don't think it's worth it. I know a lot of people, even on my last video, was saying that, you know, hey, the picture quality of the Q8FN is nice, but it doesn't have HDMI 2.1. And honestly, guys, you don't need HDMI 2.1 for PS5 and Xbox Series X. I mean, benchmark results are coming in. We're seeing these consoles are as limited as they're going to be. I mean, There is no game, period, that supports a locked 120 FPS. And all you're doing right now is getting a low resolution version of a performance mode. It's uncapped, but it's really low resolution. And I don't think that's next gen gaming personally. I feel like you'd be much better off with 4K 60 and sticking with the higher resolution mode that favors picture quality. Of course, that's a personal thing, but when people are freaking out and saying, hey, I should sell my TV, I mean, I really don't think anyone with a TV like the Q8FN should be trying to pawn it off or sell it off or anything wild like that, because HGIG is not that big of a deal. I've even used G-Sync, and I'm telling you right now, it's not this transformative thing unless you are trying to play with these uncapped frame rates with these low texture modes, these low settings modes, which again defeats the purpose of next gen console. You're essentially turning your PS5 and Xbox Series X into like a really souped up PS3 and Xbox 360, because the graphics and the textures get so low to get that 120 FPS that it's really not worth it. I mean, some people feel like it is for the smoothness, but honestly, you're going to feel a 20 frame dip, and people are pretending like when you go from 120 down to 100 FPS that you don't feel it, and you absolutely do feel that. And I just, that's not the only dip that happens. You go down into the 90s, into the 80s. At some points, again, you're over a 30 frame dip. That's felt, man. That's absolutely felt in gaming, and any real gamer will tell you absolutely you're going to feel a 30 frame dip. And I just don't think that that's worth selling off everything for things like HGIG, especially when, again, at this point in time, I feel like they're still working on it. I feel like it's a work in progress. It hasn't exactly hit its plateau yet where it's going to, again, finally show you the full nature of HGIG. I feel like give it a couple years maybe, because right now it's great if you don't have a TV and you find one with HGIG, cool. But to get rid of something you already have, I think that's incredibly unnecessary at this stage in the game. Now I'm going to open up the ISO so you see what's going on here on the TVs, both TVs, really well. I don't know how much is going to show through on YouTube, so I'll lower that down just a little bit. But essentially, the Q8FN has the richer contrast, deeper black levels. The Q90T, more hazy by comparison. Black levels for sure, a lot more hazy. And that's just kind of like the game mode experience I found on the Q90T. So while colors are very vivid and they look nice, sometimes it's just not enough to save it. Sometimes it's just the limitation of what you're looking at, and that's just as real as it gets. Now, both TVs have been adjusted, have been calibrated, and I'm telling you right now, I mean, either way you go, I guess you'll be happy if you have an older TV. I know a lot of people, come from 12-year-old TVs, 5-year-old TVs, and they buy these TVs and they're blown away because obviously your older TV couldn't do anything close to this. But I would encourage you guys to really start holding TVs to a higher standard than just what you're upgrading from. Because I'm telling you right now, when you look at these TVs and you see them on a scene-to-scene basis, seeing what they're capable of is pretty damn impressive. But, I mean, let's make sure that they're delivering more than what they did the year prior, and you're not actually buying like the downgraded version of a TV. Now, the colors on the Q90T are pretty decent. They're pretty sweet at times. But ultimately, those gray blacks are ruining a lot of the content here. Now, with HGIG, again, it's important to note that it's a nice feature, but the HGIG organization, or the interest group as they call themselves, they even say that HGIG is not really a feature that you should be advertising in televisions. It's more so like a best practice kind of thing to try to help improve the situation over with HDR, how it's just kind of like a mess right now. So I hope that by putting stuff like that out, it kind of helps you guys. I mean, I'm just trying to show you guys as much as I possibly can. If you guys have questions on HGIG, I can try to help as much as I can. Again, you can't trust the footage you're going to see 100%, so I hope the commentary was helpful. As much as I've seen with HGIG, I would say the Q8FN keeps up just as good as you're seeing, and even better. And again, it's when those sun like big sunspots are in the sky, like I say sunspots, but it's the actual sun itself is in the sky, it looks a lot better. Now, little tiny lights do tone map a lot better with HGIG, but honestly, man, you've really got to do a lot to get HGIG to be fully realized, and I just feel like at this stage, it's a bit of a waste. It's a bit of a waste to try to run out and get HGIG because it's not fully realized, as I've said like 1,000 times, I'm sure. But that being said, though, I hope that by showing this off, you guys could see a good amount of what these TVs are capable of. And yeah, that's pretty much it, man. There's not really a whole lot more to talk about. Thanks for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.